Whoosh! Gasp! The loud panting sounds entered Klein's ears in a slow and rhythmic manner. It left a chill running down his spine as he felt an inexplicable sense of horror, but he didn't feel any dangerous foreboding. It wasn't only him. Katlia, Frank Lee, and the other pirates also heard the panting sound. They either turned their heads, looked outside, raised their weapons, or were on high alert, showcasing their rich experience. After trying to discern the source, Klein discovered that the intense panting stemmed from the ruin ahead of them. It originated from a spot between the peak made of stones and stone column. At that moment, bloodless Heath Doyle floated out of the shadows. He clasped his head and softly grunted in pain. There's a corpse there. Corpse. A corpse that pants loudly. Klein's thoughts raced. Katlia, who had subconsciously removed her heavy glasses and looked towards the ruins, had her expression suddenly turned solemn. She turned her head towards the pirates in the dining hall and said, "Quick! Quickly circle around that area and do not approach it." Her voice contained a magnetic allure that jolted everyone awake. The sailors rushed out of the dining hall and headed for spots that needed help. Under Navigator Ottolov and Bosun Nina's instructions, they adjusted the sails and changed direction, passing by the ruins from a relatively great distance. Only when the peak formed by stone and stone columns vanished beyond the horizon did bloodless Heath Doyle lower his hands, his expression no longer in pain. Upon seeing this scene, Klein narrowed his eye. He felt that this Rose Bishop, the second mate of the future, might be a huge latent risk on this voyage. This wasn't because of his contempt towards Beyonders of the Secret's suppliant pathway, but a judgment he made from combining the Admiral of Stars's description and how Heath Doyle had reacted. Just now, Heath Doyle was the only one in pain, while everyone heard the loud panting. He instinctively believed that there was a corpse buried in the ruins, and Katlia's reaction after her observation proved his words. That means that even if Heath Doyle doesn't proactively listen to the true creator's voice, just by having the Beyonder powers of a listener is enough to make him hear more than the average person and most low and mid-sequence Beyonders in ordinary environments. Hence, he was affected the most and obtained more information on the danger when we encountered the panting sounds while being sufficiently close to the source of the sound. Here, it doesn't mean that problems can be resolved by avoiding similar ruin. Because according to Katlia, these waters are filled with voices that can make a demigod lose control, voices that shouldn't be heard. If Heath Doyle were to be in an inadequate or overly adequate state one day, he might end up hearing those lethal whispers. Similarly, even if a Sequence 6 Rose Bishop is inferior to a demigod who is good at listening, the gap can't be too huge. In terms of the die of probability, just 2 points, not 1 point, is enough to have Heath Doyle hear voices he shouldn't hear to go mad or lose control. I have to warn Ma'am Hermit, even though she should have long figured this out and made the corresponding preparations. Klein retracted his gaze and heard his stomach groan softly. He had yet to have breakfast. At this moment, beer was splashed across the floor. Butter had been splattered everywhere. All kinds of food, roasted fish, toast, white bread, were strewn across the floor or hanging off of something. All of them had become somewhat dirty. It should still be edible by peeling off the outer layer. Klein looked at a piece of bread that was leaning on a table leg, in a dilemma on his course of action. This was at odds with J.M. and Sparrow's persona. When he decided to wait for lunch, Katlia instructed the chef, prepare breakfast for the rest once more. Leave this to Frank. Perhaps he has uses for it. For the rearing of monsters. Klein lampooned inwardly. After a while, he finally had breakfast which wasn't as sumptuous as before. It was a smoked pork sausage and 2 utterly burnt toast, as well as a cup of unsedated light beer that was treated as water. Due to them traveling through very dangerous waters with the possibilities of mishaps happening at every turn, Klein showcased his eating skills from back when he was studying in college. He only spent 1 to 2 minutes to finish the breakfast, just like he did back in his college's mess hall. He left the pirates' dining hall and came to the deck. He was having an after-meal stroll, while also observing his environment. At that moment, the sea still appeared as though it was illuminated by a midday sun, as it was colored gold. Klein stopped and looked into the distance and saw a point of light ahead expanding. Under the sun's illumination, the point of light was producing coruscating, multicolored lusters due to the refraction. It was like a gigantic and transparent gem. As the future continued forging ahead, the point of light gradually revealed itself. It first parted before becoming clear. It was comprised of 4 gigantic columns made of pure diamond. They were like legendary columns that held up the sea. They extended downwards and stably stood there, holding up a sizable floating island. Above the floating island, the soil was charred black without any hint of greenery. In its depths, the lights had such an abnormal brightness that it outshone the midday sky. Suddenly, there was a long screech that was emitted from the island. It was loud and unrestrained, but it gave people a hair-raising sense of danger. Before long, Klein heard the galloping sounds of horses, as he saw two steeds that seemed to be tempered from gold rush out of the floating island. Behind it was a beautiful chariot, which was similarly made from gold. At this moment, Katlia's voice was amplified. She hurriedly had it resound in every corner of the future. Look down. Don't look at it. Klein was never one to put on a brave front. He subconsciously lowered his head upon hearing those words and looked at his leather boots. He noticed that the sunlight which illuminated the deck was becoming brighter before it dimmed, and was rapidly restored to its former brilliance. "TT's all right now." Katlia's voice sounded in the ship again, without any obvious emotional fluctuation. Only then did Klein look up. He discovered that the two steeds tempered from gold, and the beautiful chariot they pulled behind it had vanished. The diamond pillar silently supported the floating island as resplendent glows swirled around. What a huge diamond, what a strange floating island. What would happen if I hadn't lowered my head and had watched the golden chariot charge forward? Klein looked around as he suddenly frowned. A pirate who stood about 7 to 8 meters away from him had already vanished. Standing there were two pitch-black footprints. Looking at the ashes floating in midair, Klein vaguely knew the outcome of not lowering his head. Thankfully, Admiral of Stars has been here a few times in the past. She knows what to avoid and when to bow her head. If I had hired Mr. Hanged Man, even if he was the one steering the ghost ship, we might have already been wiped out by now, no. If the future hadn't arrived at its destination ahead of time without giving me any time to prepare, I would have long sought out Will Ossipton's advice. Magician never performs unprepared. Besides, if I had hired Mr. Hanged Man, I definitely would have purchased the relevant information from Ma'am Hermit. Klein first sighed before recovering his calm. He didn't suggest visiting the floating island to explore it. He left the future to pass it by and head forward. In the rest of the time, the sea was like the outer world. There were only the undulating waves, the vastness, silence, and endlessness. Klein occasionally saw fire embers floating on the surface of the sea, but he didn't find any signs of marine creatures, including mermaids. Time ticked by, and lunch was soon underway. Just as Klein was about to leave the deck for the dining hall, he suddenly realized that his surroundings had darkened. The sky, which had remained in a midday state, no longer had any sunlight as it was covered in rich darkness. This change was so sudden and fast that Klein's first reaction was to wonder who had switched off the light. Silently, the future was covered in a layer of resplendent stars that illuminated paths in every direction. Katlia's voice, that contained a magnetic allure, was once again magnified as it resounded in everyone's ears. Return to your room, or find any corner you can and make yourself fall asleep. Then, wait until you wake up naturally. Puzzled, Frank Lee asked loudly, "What will happen if I don't sleep?" At that moment, his voice boomed like a speaking bear. Katlia stood behind the window of the captain's cabin and said, "When we wake up, we will find you gone, never to be found again." The night here is that terrifying. Klein was curious, but he had no thoughts of attempting to stay awake. He returned to his room, and using the starlight which hadn't been extinguished on the future, he unfolded a paper crane and picked up a pencil to quickly write. What should be taken note of when traveling to the dangerous waters on the easternmost front of the Sanya Sea? Where can I find mermaids there? Putting down the pencil, he folded the crane. Without taking off his coat, he lay in bed and, with the help of cogitation, quickly fell asleep. In a hazy world, he suddenly jolted awake, clearly knowing that he was dreaming. No one is infiltrating it. Klein surveyed his surroundings and found himself on a mountaintop. Behind him and to his sides were black, cloister-like buildings. Ahead of him was a withered tree and a protruding boulder. On top of the boulder, Katlia sat alone. She hugged her knees and leaned her body forward as she stared at the mountain opposite them. She was still dressed in the black classical robe that exuded an air of mystery. Her expression wore an indescribable look of confusion. At that moment she didn't move at all. It was as though she was a stone sculpture. Why is she in my dream? Klein took a few steps forward and leaped onto a boulder. Before he could ask, he was stunned by the vast scene before his eyes. It was a feeling that struck a blow to his body and soul. In front of the boulder was a bottomless cliff, and across the cliff was a mountain which was covered with countless palaces, spires, and majestic city walls. These buildings were opulent and stacked in circles. Just one of them was abnormally huge and didn't resemble a human's residence. Combined together, it had an indescribable sense of epic proportions that seemed legendary or mythical. The sun hung far away as it cast the colors of the sunset onto the city, as the light seemed to be frozen. This is a dream shared by all of us. Katlia continued sitting there, hugging her legs as she said as though she was in a reverie. A dream shared by everyone. Klein repeated Katlia's words inwardly as he slowly realized the situation he was in. Nighttime in these dangerous waters would connect the dreams of all living creatures. And any creature that didn't sleep would lack the necessary protection, as their soul bodies weren't in the dream. As such, they would suffer an unknown attack. As for why such an attack would lead to one's disappearance and not instant death, Klein, who hadn't actually experienced it, had no grounds for speculation. As his thoughts raced, Klein retracted his gaze from Katlia's body, recasting them onto the magnificent city on the opposite cliff. He thought out of curiosity. If this world can really be formed from the connection of dreams from all the local creatures, who could have imagined such an unimaginable city? He observed for a few seconds before asking, "What is its name? What's the name of this city that can only exist in myths and legend?" Katlia stared ahead in a daze as she spoke as though she was in a reverie. "No idea. There will be a chance of seeing it every time we enter the dream, but it's impossible to approach. She said that it resembles the Great Twilight Hall in Fasak. She likely has her own guesses, but she has never told me." She? That queen mystic. The Great Twilight Hall is where the Church of the God of Combat's papal chair is. Klein surveyed the area and deliberated before saying, "I plan to look around." He believed that the future wouldn't leave these waters anytime soon. He would definitely encounter more knights and enter this dream world several times. Therefore, to defend against any accidents and to obtain intel, it was necessary for him to explore the area. And the exploration no doubt needed a partner. Katlia remained sitting there, hugging her knees. Her tone remained ethereal as she said, "Not interested. This isn't what a mature pirate admiral should say. You could have been more euphemistic. Ma'am Hermit, you resemble a young petulant lady." Klein was taken aback as he suspected if he had misheard. This was in conflict with the Admiral of Stars he had in his mind. Thinking of how Jayaman Sparrow also had his side of not being afraid of dirt and hardship, he came to a realization. He quickly made a guess. Katlia isn't completely awake in the dream. She's able to know that she's in a dream, but she's unable to effectively control it. That is to say that she would unknowingly depict the feelings buried deep in her heart and reveal some of her personality, which she usually suppresses. It's no wonder, she said, that she was never able to approach that miraculous city. It's because she never had the intention of exploring it herself. Klein thought for a moment and deliberately probed. "We might be able to discover something over there." "Not going." Katlia didn't hesitate to reply, but she never shook her head. "T'll be here waiting." Waiting? She really is in a semi-unconscious state. Klein made the judgment based on her reaction and tone. He didn't waste any more time and turned to leap off the boulder. "Puh." Klein's feet stepped on the ground as he subconsciously looked back. Katlia remained sitting there hugging her knee. There wasn't anyone around, and the congealed sunset from the city opposite her shone over, producing a long shadow for her, blending with one of the shadows produced by withered trees. A gentle mountain breeze blew as the black figure gently shook. Katlia didn't move as she stubbornly waited on the spot. At such times, there's a need for a psychiatrist to interpret the dream's emotion. This has nothing to do with the revelations obtained from divination. Klein curled his lips and surveyed his surroundings to seek a direction in which to explore. He discovered that, regardless of the direction he took, he would end up at the black buildings formed from the cloisters. There was a towering wall that isolated it from the cliff. No matter how the exploration was made, one had to pass by the cloister unless once jumped down the cliff. Since there was no other choice, Klein went directly to the pitch-black door of the cloister. The door was nearly 10 meters tall, and it didn't look like it was prepared for human use. Klein sized it up for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and extended his hands to push at the ends of the door. A creaking sound followed. The door's weight far exceeded Klein's imagination. His muscles bulged as his face flushed red. Yet he was only able to move the door by a tiny bit without being able to push it open. Thankfully, it's only a dream. As long as there's reason to believe, I can raise my strength without truly activating creeping hunger. Klein exhaled and made his left glove be tainted with a paleness. In the midst of dark green sparkles, he obtained the strength of a zombie. His arm turned thicker as his legs swelled. Screech! A deep grinding sound boomed as the door slowly opened to reveal its interior. The two dark spires and the black buildings were connected by covered bridges as they surrounded a vast grayish rock square. There were plenty of holes in the square. Embedded in them were huge arrows. There were flaming stacks in various spots, as if they had previously encountered an attack. Klein passed through the cave's entrance and entered the square. Surprisingly, he saw Frank Lee, Nina, Ottolov, and company there. This is their dream. It doesn't seem so, or should it be said that everyone's dream is limited to themselves? They will then be randomly placed somewhere in this world. Klein guessed without confidence. Frank Lee was the closest to him. He was holding a shovel and digging at some rubble. Beside him were the white bread, toast, and roasted fish which had previously fallen to the floor. He plans on using them as fertilizer. He's planting things even in his dreams. Klein went over and casually asked, "What are you doing?" Frank didn't stop, but he revealed a smile. Team cultivating some little thing. They need to sleep in the soil for some time before they can grow big and proliferate. What's their use? Klein asked, both worried and curious. Frank beamed and said, "They're a crossbreed of fungus. It can make bulls produce milk. This way we can obtain more milk, allowing more people to drink good milk." Bear those bulls? Klein's face twitched as he asked, "Will it succeed?" "There's no problems with the effects, but I'm very worried that they can't reproduce," Frank said with a frown. May death forever favor them, Klein prayed as he walked past Frank Lee and headed for the black building's entrance across the square. Along the way, he passed by Nina and Navigator Ottolov, who were drinking beside a collapsed pillar. Have you ever thought of leaving the pirate crew after you're older to find a man to marry and settle down? I don't think anyone wishes to drift out at sea their entire life. Ottolov took off his pointed bonnet and revealed his slightly hoary hair. His eyes and tone informed Klein that in between the lines he meant, "If you wish so, why not consider me? Mr. Navigator, you are old enough to be Nina's father. You need to consider your health." Passing by, Klein couldn't help but lampoon when he heard the conversation. Nina gulped a mouthful of beer and looked in a particular direction. "No, that's not the life I wish to lead. Before joining you, I once attempted to settle down in the east coast of Fasak and not be a pirate again, but I was unable to bear with the boredom. I have to lug wood and move things every day, and I can only stay at home at night. I'm not allowed to go to the bar or go out hunting in the wilderness. Such a life seems constant and unchanging. Furthermore, I suffered all kinds of criticism, tolerating those irritating people. I have to worry about the cops even if I wish to beat them up. TD's still better on the ship. Although it's boring most of the time, we can often go to different places and encounter different matters. Yeah. Even the most boring times can wreck those fellows, training them into passable pirates. I can also tell them that the one who performs the best every month can spend the night in my room. Then I'll watch them excitedly enjoy the torment. Of course, spending the night and having sex are different. It depends on my mood. A true female pirate, everyone wishes for something different." Klein neutrally gave a comment and didn't believe that there was anything wrong with Nina's ideas. "I won't disagree with her choice, but if she often kills, engages in arson and plunders, I don't mind using her head to exchange for a bounty the next time we meet." Klein retracted his gaze and arrived at the suspected entrance of the black buildings and spire. Subconsciously, he turned his head and realized that the shadows in the corner seemed normal, but there was something different about it. Bloodless Heath Doyle. He hides in the shadows even in a dream. According to my limited knowledge of psychology, this is a result of greatly lacking a sense of security. Klein pushed another door which was similarly almost 10 meters tall. Amidst the grinding sounds, his gaze suddenly froze. Behind the door was a vast hall which had 2 rows of stone pillars supporting. The hall was abnormally dark without any candlelight. As the main door opened, the light from outside shone in, lighting up the interior to make it clear. Klein saw that there were murals of various colors, with gold being the main color of choice on the dome. They were connected to one another without any gaps. It gave him a magnificent and sacred feeling. Thump, thump, thump. A figure had its back facing Klein, using the axe in its hand to chop at a long and huge tree. Its motives were unknown. The figure was dressed in a white shirt and a black vest. It didn't look like any of the pirates on the ship. There's someone else in these waters. Or could it be the mysterious pair of eyes that had been observing the deck and me? Klein's heart sank as he slowed down. He warily approached and came to the figure's side where he discerned the figure. It was a man who looked young. He had blonde short hair that was split 70-30. His emerald green eyes looked focused and serious. "What are you doing? What is this place?" Klein carefully asked. He intuitively believed that the person wasn't the owner of the mysterious eye. The young man raised his hand to touch his earlobes without turning his head. "Why are you asking these questions? My ship has sunk, and I'm busy making a canoe for myself. I don't have time to speak to you." Klein thought before asking, "Who are you?" "Who am I? I'm the unlucky Anderson. Ever since I saw that mural, I've been plagued with bad luck." The young man pointed in a direction. Tracing his finger, Klein saw a mural. The mural depicted a sea of fire that split in the middle to produce a path. On the path, there was a long line of people. The members either held their heads low with pious devotion or prostrated to the ground. Their destination was in the depths of the sea. Their leader was a lanky man with long silver hair. His facial features were mild, and his eyes were tightly closed. On his back were layered wings. Klein's pupils constricted suddenly. He recognized the leader on the mural. It was the angel of fate, which Little Sun had once depicted. It was the tailed devourer, Ouroboros. Anderson, after recognizing the leader on the mural, Klein subconsciously suspected that it was something from his dream. However, he quickly rejected the idea. This was because the unlucky Anderson wasn't someone he knew. He was also not someone that had left an impression on him. There was a low chance of him being the extension of his own dream. And Anderson had clearly said that he became unlucky after seeing the mural. It was strongly tied to the mural, so it could only be the case that the mural was part of Anderson's dream. As he focused and looked carefully, Klein quickly realized that the mural was somewhat different from the mural that Little Sun saw in the true creator's abandoned temple. The background here was a sea burning with golden flames, while the previous one was that of a desolate plain. The destination here was the depths of the sea, while the previous one had a destination of a distant mountain. On the mountaintop was a huge cross and figure hanging upside down. The bottom of the angel of fate Ouroboros' feet was black slush with heads pointing down and fishes stuck inside. Previously, it was a meandering river. It's a different mural, but more of a memory from different stages of the same pilgrimage. Klein nodded with a guess. A similar scene surfaced in his mind. A very long time ago, in a particular period of the fourth epoch, Ouroboros led a devout group of pilgrims, or the remnant believers of the true creator. With many powerful enemies in pursuit, they rowed a boat through this sea. Due to certain reasons, he abandoned the boat. With the help of the true creator or his own powers, he parted the sea and led the devotees through it and into the forsaken land of the gods, leaving behind the kindling for organizations such as the Rose Redemption and Aurora Order. In the forsaken land of the gods, they tore through desolate plains, and on the pilgrimage, they built temples along the way. And one of them was discovered by Little Sun and company. With how Will Ossipton was forced to restart a cycle and be reborn as a baby, the tailed devourer is likely still alive. Does this mean that he eventually arrived at the destination with the pilgrims, the holy residence of the true creator? Does this mean that the holy residence of the true creator is somewhere in the forsaken land of the god? With this in mind, Klein suddenly felt a baffling sense of wistfulness. If my theory is correct, then that means that no matter how the City of Silver tries to save itself, or how they continue passing the flame, once the true creator completely awakens or is restored to his original state, they would unavoidably head towards destruction. When you are very close to the divine kingdom, or holy residence of an evil god, your survival has nothing to do with your struggle. This is like the bubbles produced when sea waves surge to the shore. Once the waves recede, they would vanish. Human civilization and ethnic groups are just that weak under the gaze of an evil god. No, I can't be that pessimistic. I was only making a guess. Perhaps the one that forced Will Ossipton to reincarnate isn't Ouroboros. Perhaps the true creator wouldn't recover or awaken that easily. He might be sealed by the 7 deities, therefore. The city of silver still has a chance. The path between the forsaken land of the gods and the external world needs to be forged before the evil god escapes from his shackles, allowing them to be moved out. This is probably why the chief of the city of silver released Elder Shepherd. They need to use all the power they can get. Klein forcibly retracted his thoughts. He suddenly felt somewhat worried, afraid that his arrival was enough for him to be stuck in an endless cycle of fate created by the tailed devourer. At this point, he instinctively wished to take 4 steps counterclockwise and go above the gray fog. He wanted to forcibly search for memories that he might have lost, but ultimately, he resisted those actions and prepared to observe first. From his interpretation of the symbols, there were no repeating rivers. There was only a black slush with fish embedded inside. It didn't mean the existence of a circle of fate, only the lingering of bad luck. This was identical to what Anderson said. As a king of angels, Ouroboros definitely has more than a cycle of fate. Different temples have different murals, and them using different powers is completely logical. Besides, this is a dream. Besides, even if I didn't do anything and really am stuck in a repeated cycle, making me repeatedly converse with the Admiral of Stars, to the point of making my observations, the problem will be resolved once Monday comes. The Tarot Club will definitely not be held. Miss Justice and the others will definitely feel puzzled as they make a prayer, and ill use it to regain my memories. Klein instantly felt confident as the chaos and tension in his heart was buried instead of disappearing. He looked up ahead and discovered that the hall went further in. There was no end to it, and there was light shining inside. However, it was restricted to the entrance. The other areas were dark, and only became darker the deeper it was. All that could be seen were the wooden doors on both sides. Their destinations were unknown. Upon seeing this dark and creepy scene, Klein's desire to continue exploring was minimized. To encounter a mural left behind by a king of angels here, who knows what will happen if I delve deeper or enter some room, the fear of the unknown was an extremely ancient feeling. Premonition of danger with unknown origins had brought about a strong terror towards the unknown. Klein observed himself for a few seconds before he stopped proceeding forward. He turned towards Anderson, who was chopping the gigantic tree. "Why are you here?" Anderson looked up and scoffed. "Team a treasure hunter. So tell me, why would I be here?" "Treasure hunter," Klein casually asked. "There's treasure here." Anderson continued busying himself with the creation of the so-called canoe. His voice suddenly turned deep. "There are treasures everywhere in these waters, as long as you obtain it successfully and leave alive." "That's true, but the problem is that it's very dangerous if one isn't a demigod, but it's even more dangerous for a demigod to be here." Klein looked into the hall's depths and asked, "Do you know where this place is?" Anderson traced his gaze and said, "I don't know. At least a third of my companions formed a team and headed in to explore. But they never returned." "Are you referring to the real world or the dream world?" Klein asked with a clear line of thought. Bang! After the axe landed, Anderson laughed. "Of course it's in the real world. The ones that proceeded to explore the dream are the other third of my companions. They similarly didn't return." CC0 Klein inhaled as he thought. "Where are their bodies in the real world?" "They have mutated into monsters. They killed off quite a number of my companions." Anderson raised his axe and cleaved down. Clang! Amidst a crisp sound, his axe broke into 2. As the crack was towards the back, the fragment immediately shot at him. Anderson's right chest and abdomen immediately bled like a spewing fountain. He held his left hand to his wound and looked up at Klein. Smiling bitterly, he said, "I told you I was plagued with bad luck ever since I saw that mural. Thankfully, this isn't considered too unlucky. At the very least, they didn't destroy my ordinarily handsome face. Are such descriptive terms supposed to be used that way?" Klein looked at Anderson, quickly pull out the fragments from his body as he handled the wound, and consumed some medicine. He discovered that Anderson was unfazed, and the skill involved in his actions meant that he had already gotten accustomed to it. Klein had a single hand in his pocket as he played with the coins in it. After some deliberation, he asked, "When your companions began the exploration, were you part of the group that stayed behind to study the mural?" Anderson was taken aback as he inserted his medicine bag into his belt and wiped his mouth. "No. T was part of the group that did the exploration. As he spoke, he grinned and revealed a genial smile. Klein's pupils constricted as he bent his back slightly and raised his left palm. At this moment, blinding sunlight illuminated everything in a dazzling white. Then it dimmed and vanished. Klein naturally opened his eyes and discovered that the outside had been restored to the midday state. He took out the pocket watch in his inner pocket and opened it. Only half an hour passed. This night is rather short. That unlucky Anderson looked very normal, but who knew that he was that terrifying? Rolling to his feet, Klein suddenly recalled something. Snake of Fate, Will Ossipton had yet to reply to him. As everyone's dream had been pulled into the world without the connection of the spirit world, he was unable to locate. Or did he sense Ouroboros's aura and didn't dare come close? Or could there be something problematic with these waters to begin with? As his thoughts whirled, Klein decided to verify it. As for how it could be verified, the method was simple. He could sleep again while it was still noon. However, he wasn't in a rush to do so. This was because he wasn't sure if there were any taboos about sleeping in the day. Wearing his cap, Klein came outside the captain's cabin and knocked on the door. After 3 knocks, he retracted his hand and patiently waited. Before long, Katlia opened the door. She no longer looked as lost as she was in the dream. She had worn her heavy glasses once again. "T.S. sleeping in the day all right?" Klein asked directly. Katlia nodded. "Yes." After answering, she hesitated and asked, "It seems you were very proactive in that dream." Realizing how much danger lurked in these waters, and thinking about how he would be forced to show some of his abilities, Klein decided to proactively lay the foundations of his future explanation. He looked at Katlia and smiled politely. "Yes. This is a gift bestowed upon me by my lord." My lord, under Katlia's thick glasses, her eyes clearly shimmered. In a rare instance, she frowned slightly and eased them without asking any more questions. Klein thought for a moment, then he added, "Be careful of Heath Doyle." Katlia clearly understood what he meant and directly answered, "Don't worry. He has a sealed artifact which has a negative effect of him, only being able to hear voices from nearby." That's a smart use of a negative effect. Klein didn't drone on as he took off his hat and bowed before returning to his room. He lay down once again and used cogitation to fall asleep. In the dream world, he woke up and saw the familiar pitch-black plains and black steeple. Phew, it's still possible to connect. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and traveled into the steeple. In the usual place, he saw the scattered tarot cards and the new word. There's plenty of dangers there, the most dangerous being the dream that happens when night falls. TT isn't about the disappearances if you do not sleep, but there's one thing to remember. Do not explore that dream. Absolutely do not explore that dream. Since there's not enough space, I won't explain why. Alright, it's just a joke. The reason is that the area contains some of the dreams left behind by a deity. Upon seeing Will Ossipton's warning, Klein first found himself blessed with good luck. Thankfully, I didn't court death and continue the exploration. He didn't hesitate to heave a sigh of relief. Although he had seen the mural related to Ouroboros, as well as the terrifying monster, Anderson, who mutated for some unknown reason, he didn't actually physically get himself into a dangerous situation. I wonder if PLL randomly appear in a region in the next dream, or will it continue from before? If it's the latter, the best choice of action is to not disturb Anderson so as to avoid agitating him. I'll just walk the same way back and leave that black cloister. Klein retracted his gaze and continued reading. Apart from the dream, the other things aren't that troublesome. As long as you don't attempt to approach those ruins, directly look at the thing that flies in the sky at midday, or challenge the storms that give ample warning, then it wouldn't be a problem if you follow the safe sea routes that have been verified by others. As for mermaids, just keep cruising forward and you'll ultimately encounter them. This is because, at their levels, they will only live in relatively safer areas, and there aren't many such areas. Finally, I hope everything goes smoothly. Sincerely, your friend who might be often in deep sleep due to reaching a critical stage in his maturing development, Will Ossipton. The final sentence was long and somewhat awkward sounding, but Klein instantly understood what the snake of fate meant. Before I'm born, don't disturb me unless it's something extremely important and critical. I'll try my best, Klein replied inwardly without any assurance. If he successfully advanced, then it might not take long before he had to seek Will Ossipton's help in finding the sequence 4 potion formula for the seer pathway. Being more confident with finding mermaids, Klein immediately left the dream, wore his hat, and headed for the pirates' dining hall. Due to the dream's disturbance, most of the food had turned cold, but the pirates still had a great time eating. After all, no one died. Since no one died during this mystical encounter, they naturally felt great that they had something to brag about. "Do you want a cup of milk?" Frank Lee held a plate and sat opposite Klein, asking warmly. Recalling the conversation in the dream, Klein firmly shook his head with a deadpan expression. Inwardly, he was very worried that the milk on the ship were all Frank's experimental products. Frank didn't mind as he gulped a mouthful of milk. "T remember telling you about those little things in the dream?" "Yes." Klein cut through a dragon bone fish that was cooked in sauce, and he stuffed it into his mouth. This kind of fish was well known for having few bones. Most of the time, it only had one main bone. In Backlund, due to its various species, they were considered a mid to high-end delicacy, but east of the Oravi Island, in the periphery of the safe sea routes, they could often be caught. Frank chuckled. "My description back then was a little inaccurate. Their true purpose was to successfully produce milk even when they aren't in a state capable of lactation, regardless of whether they are male or female. As long as they consume it, they will produce milk and return to normal once they aren't fed. This way, the milk cows don't have to suffer any torture. This way, it becomes fairer for men and women to bring up their children. It will be beneficial for women to head out for work." "Wait, why are you telling me this?" Klein nearly failed to maintain his persona as Jam and Sparrow. At that instant, he felt that the nickname of Crazy shouldn't be Jam and Sparrows but Frank Lee. He's actually someone who supports equality between men and women. However, his means are a little terrifying, that's right. The Church of Mother Earth is like the Church of the Goddess. They believe that women should have the same standing in society as men. However, they place more emphasis on reproduction, treating it as the holiest matter. Among the 7 churches, the Church of Storms and the Church of the God of Combat are most biased towards men. The Church of the Sun is next. As for the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, they are different from the other churches. They discriminate based on intelligence. The Church of Steam is neutral and has even worked with the Church of the Goddess to encourage women to head out for work due to the need for more labor in the development of industry. Klein instantly had the differences between the 7 churches flash past his mind. He looked up and glanced at Frank Lee as though what he had just said was something trivial. This made Frank rather happy as he couldn't help but drink a few more mouthfuls of milk. After the pirates finished their lunch in batches, Katlia pushed open the windows to the captain's cabin once again. Using magic, she amplified her voice. "There's an island 1.5 nautical miles ahead of us. We will dock there and wait for the storm to pass. In these waters, every time there's a switch from noon to nighttime, there's a possibility of a terrifying storm occurring. I cannot confirm when it will happen, but I believe it's safer for us to wait for it to pass before we continue our voyage." She went into the details a lot more than in the past, as it wasn't a sudden occurrence, and there was plenty of time. One of the things people at sea feared the most was a storm, therefore no one objected to it. They went according to Katlia's instructions. Under Navigator Odolov's and Bosun Nina's guidance, they nervously prepared to dock. And this made Klein confirm one of the matters that Will Ossipton had mentioned. Do not challenge any signs of a storm. Before long, an island covered with gigantic trees appeared ahead of the future. The more than 100-meter-long sailboat adjusted its course and docked against the wind. More than half an hour passed as the sky suddenly dimmed. Lead-colored clouds surfaced one after another. They overlapped with one another, as though they enveloped all the surrounding waters. Midst a loud boom and blinding flashes of lightning, a hurricane from afar swept over. It was connected to the clouds at the top and to the sea at the bottom. It was more exaggerated than any legendary giant. It was like a gigantic coiling serpent in a bid to destroy the world. The terrifying hurricane brought with it waves that towered like mountains. Lightning that branched out like trees and didn't stop because of the incoming storm. It constantly struck the surface of the sea, splitting into tiny electric bolts that spread outward. As the rain pattered down on the Future's deck, it made the pirates who had entered the cabin or gotten shelter feel like the apocalypse had arrived. Such a storm didn't last too long. The sea calmed down after about 15 minutes, and the hurricane dissipated. The midday sunlight reigned in the sky once again. You can head onto the island for a while, but don't wander inside. You have to be within the range of the cannons. Katlia gave the pirates a brief chance of reprieve. Klein kept in mind Will Ossipton's warnings and had no desire to explore the island. After leaving the future, he only walked about on the shore, taking in the feeling of having his feet on solid ground. Beach, sunlight, trees. It feels like a vacation, Klein thought in amusement when he suddenly noticed a rapidly moving black dot through the corner of his eye. It was rushing over from the boundary of a cliff. The black dot increased in size to reveal a human figure. Not far away, Katlia, who was on the sand, also noticed the abnormality. She half turned around and took off the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. The figure with emerald-colored eyes approached. He was wearing a white shirt, a black vest and trousers. It was of medium build with his blonde hair split 70-30. Anderson. The unlucky Anderson. Klein instantly recognized him. The person was none other than the terrifying Anderson in the dream world. It was the Anderson who said that his companions never returned after they proceeded to explore the hall, but had claimed to be a member of the exploration team. At that moment, Anderson raised his right hand. Without any hesitation, as Jam and Sparrow, Klein took out a charm and chanted a single word in ancient Hermit. Storm. The charm made of tin immediately turned sharp, resembling a thin blade. With the infusion of spirituality, the wind in midair reverberated. With a deadpan expression, Klein threw out the charm in his hand at Anderson. Sue, Sue, Sue. Azure sharp blades shot at their target like a lined-up firing squad. Anderson was raising his right hand high with a smile, and was about to say something when he heard a deep and mysterious incantation and the scalp-numbing sound of the wind. His gaze froze as he threw himself to the side, and somersaulted multiple times in a pathetic manner, as if the area before him was scorching metal. Sue, Sue, Sue. The wind blades struck the beach, slicing clear slits into the sand, but they were just short of hitting their target. Stop! Stop! As Anderson nimbly somersaulted to dodge, he shouted, "T come in peace. I mean no harm." Anderson Hood, Admiral of Stars, suddenly said a name as she raised her hand to stop J.M. and Sparrow, who had taken out a charm. She knows Anderson. Klein didn't rashly chant the charm's incantation as he said in a deep voice, "He has already mutated. I saw him in the dream." He wasn't surprised at meeting the unlucky Anderson. This was because the pirates were all in the same area during the dream. They were all very close to one another, which also meant that Anderson, who wasn't too far away, was also very close to the future. No, not at all. Anderson stood up, at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. He raised his hands like he was surrendering. "I recognize you. You asked me many questions. Back then, I wanted to pull a prank on you. Really, it was just a joke to enliven the mood. Don't you think that having the mood suddenly change into one of horror is an exhilarating experience? Of course, I'm referring to the target and not myself. TF, I had participated in the exploration. How could I still be alive? That is what I'm worried about." Klein didn't believe his explanation. Anderson shrugged and said, "I was preparing to explain that the moment I said that. I was planning on telling you that I was joking and had planned to seek your help. I hoped that you could take me away, but at that moment the dream ended, damn it. I was really too unlucky." "It does comply with the traits of being unlucky," Klein silently muttered. He planned on flipping a coin right there, and then to test him with divination when he suddenly heard Admiral of Stars Katlia say, "Listen to what he has to say. He's very famous in the Fog Sea. He has the nickname Strongest Hunter." Strongest Hunter. Klein was shocked by this nickname. After carefully recalling, he realized that the man didn't have a bounty on his head. That meant that Anderson Hood's description of himself in the dream world was real and reliable. He was more of a treasure hunter. Unfortunately, J.M. and Sparrow hasn't killed any pirate admirals. Otherwise, I would be the strongest hunter. Klein didn't let down his guard as he coldly looked at the man. As long as Anderson Hood showed any signs of abnormality, he would immediately throw the charm in his hand. After all, the activation incantation was all the same. At his sequence, he could do it simultaneously while injecting his spirituality. Upon hearing the Admiral of Stars' introduction, Anderson seriously shook his head. "No, I'm not the strongest hunter." "Oh, he's still rather humble," Klein sighed inwardly. Anderson chuckled and added, "Admiral of Stars, if you really insist, then it's best if you add the condition below that of a demigod." "Yes, the strongest hunter below that of a demigod. Take back what I just said. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched indiscernibly. Seeing no response from the Admiral of Stars, Anderson naturally lowered his arm. These waters are very dangerous, but it contains many treasure. In this regard, I believe the two of you are very aware. In the past, many adventurers, or more precisely, treasure hunters, have entered these waters to seek our fortuitous encounters, but most of them didn't leave these waters alive. Heh, I'm talking about most, so there are always some lucky ones who can obtain items and ingredients while successfully leaving. The treasure hunting team I was in was organized by two treasure hunters who are experienced in this area. They claim to be very aware of which ruins are not to be explored in the first half of the safe route, and which ruins could be attempted. They also claim to know which methods should be used to hunt various kinds of monsters, as well as what methods should be used to avoid evil creatures who have lost control. T have always been curious about these waters and was successfully convinced by them and joined the expedition. And then, Katlia looked at the figure opposite her with her black eyes that had a purple hue. Anderson sighed and said, "It was very smooth in the beginning, as smooth as it can be. We avoided danger and obtained many of the relics left behind by former explorers, and we also hunted some monsters and obtained several ingredients. Everything changed when we discovered a strange temple on a submerged island. There were many murals which remained intact. This gentleman has also seen it in the dream world." He used his chin to gesture at Klein. "That's not important," Klein replied calmly. Anderson shook his head and smiled bitterly. One of the murals was very sinister. It described a pilgrimage proceeding forward amidst a parted sea. The leader of the pilgrimage is depicted as an angel, having long silver hair that reached his back. He had very mild facial features. T was the first to arrive in front of that mural. I reached out my right hand and habitually outlined the various lines in midair. It's true, I really didn't touch it. I was at least 5 centimeters away, but to my surprise, the angel in the mural suddenly opened his eye. "Your nickname as the strongest hunter must have been forced as a result of you attracting too many problems." Klein scoffed silently without any sense of pity. "Silver-haired angel?" Katlia asked in return. "Yes, but I'm not sure which angel it is. At the very least, he hasn't appeared in any of the portraits of the 7 churches. Of course, the mural artist might have casually added it, and it might not be real." Anderson was just about to raise his hand to comb his hair when he discovered that the man wearing a round neck shirt, a brown jacket, pantaloons with a dark-colored cap was coldly staring at him. It appeared as though any abnormal action would result in the man attacking without hesitation. But at that moment, Klein was thinking about something else. This fellow is very professional when it comes to art. At the very least, the typical person wouldn't be able to know of so many religious portraits. Katlia, who didn't receive an adequate answer, immediately turned her head towards Klein, her gaze filled with an inquisitive look. She had just heard from Anderson Hood that Jam and Sparrow had seen the mural. Perhaps this member of the organization that has been gifted by the Lord can recognize the angel. Katlia had an inexplicable feeling that Jam and Sparrow might really know the answer. Considering how Ma'am Hermit would be able to obtain the answer at the next tarot club from a casual question, Klein didn't hesitate to simply say, "Tail Devourer or Robberose." Tail Devourer or Robberose. That angel of fate. That king of angels. Katlia unknowingly pursed her lips as the purple hue in her eyes turned slightly more obvious. The last time she had heard this name was from the tarot club, thanks to Miss Justice. And that was her first time learning of the existence of the kings of angels. She never expected to obtain clues of them in the real world in just a few months. Tail Devourer or Robberose. Anderson ruminated over the name in a daze. Klein didn't speak further, showing his disinterest in explaining. Seeing how the Admiral of Stars wasn't speaking a word, Anderson could only laugh and continue. "I thought I was hallucinating back then, because the mural didn't show any abnormality after that. Following that, our team fractured into 2. Most of them were frightened by my account and believed that they shouldn't continue exploring the temple. The remaining third desired to obtain more treasure and began setting off deeper into the temple. We waited an entire day. Noon switched night a total of 3 times, but we didn't manage to see them return. We were all outstanding treasure hunters, so we knew that something must have gone wrong. After making some confirmations, we didn't dare stay any longer or wait. We immediately left the temple and got onto the ship to return the way we came. We had already received plenty, and we didn't wish to take any more risks. Wait, none of you had the intention to save your companion. Yes, a treasure hunting team that is temporarily put together will only bother with themselves and the few friends they are familiar with when they encounter danger. According to my experience, those companions of yours that vanished might be eating the fingers of corpses. Klein lampooned and didn't reprimand Anderson. Anderson sighed again and said, after leaving that temple, I discovered that there was something abnormal about myself. On the one hand, I became very unlucky, with everything I do failing. Even when drinking light beer in silence, I'll realize that someone had used a beer barrel as a toilet and pissed in it. Well, that's not what I encountered. It was my companion. On the other hand, we obtained control of ourselves in our dreams. We were no longer in a reverie and knew something, but we had no means to take action. Therefore, a number of my companions, a third of the original number of people, ventured deep into the dream world. Hey, they never returned. Katlia, who had been listening in silence, asked, what about their bodies in the real world? They mutated into monsters, killing quite a number of my remaining companions and sailors. Anderson took an obvious deep breath. We might have successfully killed those monsters, but due to the lack of sailors, as well as encountering a streak of bad luck, we failed to reach this island in time before the storm arrived. Therefore our ship sank. Likewise for our loot. The rest of my companions either drowned, got struck by lightning, or got eaten by the underwater monsters. I didn't see all of it myself. As for me, I was relatively stronger and luckier than them. I was sent flying by the waves and successfully swam to the shore of this island, and began attempting to create a canoe to leave this area. As you can see, even my final axe is shattered. It was also reflected in the dream. Anderson's final sentences were directed at Klein. They really are a treasure-hunting group plagued with bad luck. Klein inwardly drew the crimson moon for him. He believed that Anderson's description was likely real. His experience didn't seem to be fabricated out of thin air. However, it was unknown if he was hiding something. Perhaps Anderson had really gone deep into the temple and eaten the fingers of the corpses before coming out, believing that he was fine. Perhaps he had already explored numerous places in the dream world and had been corrupted by some unknown creature in an inconspicuous manner. After Anderson Hood finished recounting his experience, he smiled at Catalia and the man who he didn't know the name of. Do I have the honor of being a passenger on your future? T will pay for the fare. He looked as if payment wasn't a problem at all. Katlia once again turned her head to the side towards Klein, as though asking if he would accept. This is to say that you are leaning towards accepting his request. Aren't you going to do any tests? I have to go above the gray fog to divine before I can provide a clear answer. What gives you the confidence? A bay under power obtained once a mystery prior reaches sequence 5. Klein figured out a lot of information from Catalia's gate. Just as he was hesitating, Anderson hurriedly said, I'm very familiar with the route ahead. T can help you avoid the latent dangers on the safe sea route, and I can tell you which ruins aren't to be explored. I can also give you early notice to avoid the singing voices of the mermaids in time. Singing voices of mermaids. Klein's eyes nearly lit up as it took him a great deal of effort to maintain Jam and Sparrow's image. Yes, a day's voyage from here, and I mean a day in terms of the world outside. We will circle around a ruin and turn. Upon saying that, Anderson suddenly realized something as he shut his mouth with a smile without saying anything more. Klein thought for a moment and took out a gold coin in front of Anderson as he silently chanted. Anderson Hood is problematic. He repeated 7 times and went through the standard process of divination, but he didn't hold any hopes for an answer. It was a test on Anderson. If Anderson really was problematic, he would definitely show signs of guilt. After all, he couldn't be certain of Jam and Sparrow's divination standard, and was unable to determine if he could disrupt it successfully. Ding! The gold coin was flung into the air before land. Klein glanced at it before putting it into his pocket. No problem. PLL later make a confirmation by going above the gray fog, Klein added inwardly. Katlia looked at Anderson and nodded. T agreed to your request. However, after we leave these waters, you need to hand over half of what you have. If there's nothing, I'll not take anything either. Anderson fell silent for a few seconds before smiling again. Deal? Having found a way out, he clearly relaxed as he smiled. Also, I have to warn you that although my bad luck is limited to me alone, you should be careful because I might attract monsters. Of course, I believe that with you, this gentleman and myself, we should be able to guarantee our safety." Just as he said that, the entire island quaked. A smoky plume emanated out of the primitive forest. "Don't tell me a monster is really coming." Anderson subconsciously turned agape. The ground trembled slightly as a figure that was nearly 3 meters tall appeared at the boundary of the island's primitive forest. Its body was grayish-white in color, seemingly formed from boulder. Its face was pothole without any obvious eyes, nose, mouth, or ears. "Stone giant," Catlia muttered the monster's type. Be it Klein or Anderson, both of them knew nothing about such monsters. However, they didn't cast an inquisitive look at Catlia. They focused on the monster, looking highly professional. Catlia turned her body to face the docked future. She raised her right hand halfway and amplified her voice. "Aim." The pirates on duty immediately adjusted dozens of cannons on the port of the ship, aiming them right at the stone giant which was lumbering over. Boom! 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 Cannonballs flew out and landed around the stone giant, sending dust flying as the bombardment covered a huge area. The ground clearly quaked as flames surged. Splinters spewed everywhere as though everything could be destroyed. Taboo! 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 The tall grayish-white figure tore out of the dust, having not suffered any serious damage. All it had were a few cracks on its surface. Catlia said without a perturbed expression, "This isn't a kind of giant but a kind of stone golem. Its core is the main ingredient of Sequence 5 Guardian, from the Guardian sequence pathway. Therefore, its defenses are extremely high." Amidst the reverberating cannon bombardment, Klein nearly suspected if there was a problem with his auditory senses. "Since you know that the stone giant has high defense, why did you use a cannon bombardment? Isn't that a waste of cannonballs?" He thought in puzzlement as he lampooned. Perhaps hearing his inner thoughts, Catlia said as she watched the stone giant approach, "I've never encountered such a Beyonder creature before, so I wish to do some tests." "I have nothing to say against such a reason." Klein was rendered speechless. At this moment, Anderson Hood, who had been observing the stone giant the entire time, raised his hand and said, "Do you have anyone who has Beyonder powers in the ice and frost domain?" "Me," Catlia coldly answered. Seeing how Ma'am Hermit had the means, Klein swallowed back the words he nearly said out loud. He really didn't wish to activate creeping hunger unless necessary, despite Zombie possessing the powers of ice and frost. He believed that he couldn't find any suitable food on the island. Catlia took out a grayish-black scroll from a secret pocket in her warlock robe and softly chanted a single word in ancient Hermes, "Freezing." Silently, the scroll was consumed by icy blue flames, and immediately there were crystalline streams of light that appeared in midair. They flew towards the stone giant and froze the target within as icicles hung from it. Amidst jarring, cracking sounds, the ice layer cracked in turn as the stone giant slowly walked out of the zone. However, its grayish-white exterior had turned a darker shade. Its motions were a lot stiffer than before. At this moment, Anderson raised his hands as though he was a conductor gesturing for the audience to give their applause. Orange-yellow flames, which were almost white in color, sprouted at the stone giant's feet, as though it had stepped into a particular trap. Its surface rapidly produced a bout of steam, as cracks spread across its body in the form of deep fracture. Anderson pulled back with his right arm as a burning white spear condensed in his palm. The flames at the tip of the spear condensed to a point as it emitted a blinding luster. The spear flew out, accurately hitting the crack in the stone giant's belly as the flames melted a huge hole in it. As for Anderson Hood, who was originally on the beach, he seemed to merge with the burning white spear. The flames brightened as he strangely appeared behind the stone giant. He held his left hand into a fist as his arm bulged. With an uppercut, he struck upwards from the hole and into the stone giant's heart. This simple-looking strike created an exaggerated effect. The stone giant immediately froze on the spot, as cracking sounds constantly emitted from its interior. In seconds, it had crumbled into rubble. A critical strike, Klein's pupils constricted. Catlia calmly stood on the spot and said without any surprise, "Sequence 5 of the Hunter pathway is Reaper. Furthermore, they are good at finding the weakness of their prey. Reaper, a death reaper of life." No wonder Klein nodded slightly. At this moment, Anderson crouched down and rummaged through the stone giant's carcass. Then he turned his head and smiled ruefully. "TT's not a real monster." That meant that there weren't any spoils of war. While Anderson described the situation, the rubble vanished at a discernible pace. For an unlucky fellow like you, don't be the one opening chests or looting corpses, Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. Anderson returned and kept droning on. The greatest problem of these waters is this. Not every monster will provide you with riches. This is because conjured monsters such as this are part of more powerful monsters of a higher level. Of course, it's possible that they're the result of remnant powers and auras. Klein already had a preliminary theory towards this. Having gone through the voyage, he discovered that there were beyonder traces of sun, evernight, storm, and the spectator pathway. He had a more fleshed-out theory from his previous theory. He originally suspected that these waters were the remnants of a battlefield in a war between second epoch ancient gods. Storm belonged to Elf King Sonithrim, Spectator belonged to Dragon King Anquil, Evernight belonged to King of Demonic Wolves Phlegria. With Little Sun providing him with the legendary records from the City of Silver at each gathering, Klein had gained a preliminary understanding of the authorities of the 8 ancient gods in the second epoch. However, the constant midday and the sun chariot formed from gold had made Klein have doubts about his theory. This was because none of the 8 ancient gods grasped the sun pathway. Soon, Klein connected it to Ammon's and Adam's father, the City of Silver creator who was deemed as the ancient sun god. After this creator awakened, and after a series of intense battles, he had taken back the authorities of the ancient god. Hence, these ruins of the battle between gods were left behind. The incomplete mural he saw at the elvish ruin suddenly surfaced in Klein's mind. Elf King Sonithrim and the City of Silver's creator, who was also the ancient sun god, were at odds. As his thoughts wandered, Anderson had returned to his chuckling state. He looked at him and said, "How do I address you?" "Jamin Sparrow," Klein simply gave his name. "Jamin Sparrow." Anderson was first taken aback before recovering. "I've heard of you. You're the adventurer who nearly successfully hunted Vice Admiral Aylman. You have the title of the craziest hunter. Last month, when the ship I was on board passed by the Rorsted Archipelago and Oravi Island, I had thoughts of getting to know you over drinks, but your whereabouts were unknown." "Last month. I was doing volunteer work at the hospital." Klein nodded and said, "You know me now. Also, try your best not to say anything." T4, Anderson forced a smile. "I know, my bad luck tends to make the negative words I say become reality." "All right, stop looking at me. I won't speak again. Put down that charm of yours." Due to the appearance of the stone giant, the pirate's relaxation time was cut short. The future quickly set off once again, venturing deep into the sea. Along the way, Klein stayed standing on the deck and leaned against the side of the ship. He observed his surroundings while Anderson was loitering on the ship. He was good at socializing and interacting with the pirates. Impressive. He easily got to know the situation of the ship. Klein shot a glance at Anderson, who was drinking with a few pirates in the shadows, as he sighed inwardly. Of course, the strongest hunter probably doesn't know that the alcohol he's drinking has a sedative of unknown origins. Klein held back his laughter as he thought mischievously. With Anderson's help, the future circled around 2 hidden maelstroms and a floating palace ruin as it continued down the safe sea route. About 3 hours later, night fell again. Klein rapidly found his lucidity and reason in the dream as he opened his eyes and looked around. His vision was a swath of pitch blackness with nothing to be seen. "Don't tell me I'm blind," such a thought instinctively appeared in Klein's mind. Then he reached his right palm into his pocket and took out a matchstick. This was a component that every magician needed for his spell. With familiarity, he took out a matchstick and ignited it. Immediately, a weak flame appeared in front of Klein's eyes. The flame struggled as it bloomed, slightly illuminating his surroundings. He was in a prison cell, one with an unlatched gate made up of metal railings. "Why would I be here? I'm neither beside Admiral of Stars or in the mural hall where Anderson was. I'm randomly placed in a particular area." As his thoughts raced, Klein flicked his wrist and extinguished the matchstick that nearly burnt his finger. A resplendent layer of sunlight bloomed on his left hand, as his eyes had 2 miniaturized suns. With the soul of the priest of light, he obtained night vision from the light of holiness. As he observed his surroundings, Klein saw that the cell he was in wasn't too cramped, but the floor was dirty and messy. There were many footprints, a mystery as to what previously happened. Most of them are human footprints. A few of them are rather exaggerated, likely belonging to giants. The single bed is broken in the corner while there's a key beside the door. Someone succeeded in a jailbreak. Klein came before the unlocked metal gate and carefully looked outside. The prison was filled with darkness. The darkness enveloped a stone-paved corridor, and across from him was a cold but solid wall. The path extended continuously on both sides, as though there were more prison cells. Klein retracted his gaze, picked up the key on the ground, and locked the gates. He didn't attempt to head out and continued staying in the cell. He clearly remembered that Will Ossipton had advised him not to explore the dream world. Therefore, he planned on awaiting the arrival of noon. So what if it's a prison cell? It's not like I'm leaving. Klein huddled in the corner, sitting on the halved single bed, seemingly blending with the rich darkness around him. In this extreme silence, Klein suddenly cocked his head since he vaguely heard light footsteps. The sound of footsteps came from afar in an ethereal manner, and at a slow frequency as it approached him. Guard, no way. I haven't gone anywhere. Has the far-reaching hands of trouble come on its own? Klein revealed a grimace that didn't match J.M. and Sparrow's persona. He nearly drew a gasp. The only thing stopping him from doing that was because it would cause quite a stir, making trouble discover his hiding spot. No longer a green nighthawk, he rapidly made up his mind. He held his breath, slowly stood up, and moved to the side of the metal gate without a sound. He secretly and silently looked in the direction of the incoming footsteps. He believed that, since hiding and avoiding it wasn't necessarily useful, he had to determine the danger revolving around the situation so as to make the best choice. The two miniature suns in his eyes dimmed as Klein waited for nearly a minute, as he heard the footsteps turn heavier and clearer. Following that, he heard the clanking sound of a metallic gate slamming into the wall. Following that, he saw a towering figure appear on the right of the corridor. The figure was nearly 2.5 meters tall and wore black, full-body armor. The cold feeling it exuded seemed corporeal, like a gigantic knight. His aura was converged, and he was stayed like the deep sea. In the space where his eyes were, there were two deep red glows that flickered. In his hand was a long and broad black sword. Krieg. He pushed open the metal gate to a cell and stepped in. He circled the cell, seemingly in search of something. Man, is he trying to find a particular prisoner? I'll definitely be discovered if this continues. Klein hesitated for a moment and wondered if he should leave the cell and search for a way out before the figure came close, or to sneak an attack to finish the target in a clean swoop before continuing to huddle in a corner to await the end of the dream. After judging how much time he had left to think, Klein quickly took off the topaz pendant on his left wrist and began divining with a voice that perhaps only he could hear. That night from before is very strong. After quickly repeating it 7 times, Klein opened his eyes to see the topaz pendant turning clockwise at a high frequency and large amplitude. This meant that the target was an extremely dangerous existence. Without any hesitation or time to hesitate, Klein used the beyonder powers of a clown and controlled his muscles to pull open the metal gates without causing any additional stimulation. Then he took the opportunity when the black-armored entity entered another cell to gently walk out into the corridor and rapidly headed left with his body crouched. In the immense darkness, as he listened for any commotion behind him, he maintained his stealthy and swift motions, quickly making a bend and arriving at a metal gate which opened outwards. It looked like an exit. Attempting to push and pull, Klein discovered that the metal gates weren't heavy, but it had been locked. After 2 seconds of thought, he took out the key he picked up inside his cell, inserted it, and twisted it without holding out much hope. A light click of a latch opening sounded as the metal gates unlocked. That works. Although it's a dream, you can't just have a randomly picked up key be an important item. I originally planned on folding some paper to insert into the keyhole and repeatedly slice at it, bit by bit. Klein slowly pushed open the door as he lampooned while thinking in puzzlement. To his disappointment, what stood behind the metal gates wasn't the exit but a hall filled with junk. Closing the gate behind him in passing, he locked it again and circled around the items randomly strewn around, in search of a possible door or path. A few seconds later, he noticed an inconspicuous black wooden door in a corner. Therefore, he carefully approached it and reached out for the handle. The scene inside naturally appeared in his mind. It was a storage room, and on the right was a full-body mirror. And to its right was a figure wearing a short linen robe. There's someone there. The escaped prisoner. Having been forced to leave his comfort zone, Klein decided to take hold of the initiative in a limited fashion. Therefore, he gently twisted the handle and pushed open the black wooden door. He wanted to gather information on the general situation, so as to determine where to engage in combat or flee at the critical moment in time. "Who is it?" A figure wearing a short linen robe hurriedly but softly asked. Its voice was filled with despair and pain. "An adventurer," Klein succinctly answered. He had already used his night vision to discern the figure's looks. It was a man with a weathered face. He had wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth, but his hair was raven black and lustrous. There wasn't a single strand of gray hair. His short linen robe was ancient and simple. His expression was distorted due to the pain. His rarely seen pure black eyes were filled with unconcealed surprise and puzzlement. "Adventurer, why would you be here?" Klein maintained a certain distance from the man, who was difficult to discern whether he was considered young or old. He stood by the entrance and looked at him. Before asking others, introducing yourself is a necessary form of politeness. As a faceless, just the short act of sizing him up from before had made him grasp the man's feature. Apart from the discordant hair and the wrinkles, he had an old, gruesome scar on his cheek. The man was startled as he worriedly glanced at the hall. "TT's best you close the door. We cannot be caught by that devil otherwise." The muscles on his face clearly twitched as though he had recalled something nasty. "Devil?" Klein murmured and extended his hand back to close the black wooden door. The man heaved a sigh of relief and smiled wryly. "T apologize. I was indeed impolite. My name is Leomester, an ascetic of a religious organization." "A religious organization? From the looks of it, you aren't a devotee of any of the 7 deities." Klein discovered a problem with his choice of word. If he was an ascetic of one of the 7 deities, he could have directly said it out loud. Even the high priest of the Church of Sun and the bishops of the Church of Storms wouldn't come to blows the moment they met in such a dangerous place. Leomester said with a self-deprecating laugh, "That's right. I worship the original creator. He is an omnipotent and omniscient existence, the source of everything great. He is the beginning and the end. He is the God of all gods." This, upon hearing how this person revered the original creator, Klein's first reaction was that it was the Twilight Hermit Order. However, there are also some smaller denominations in the northern and southern continent. There's quite a number of people who believe in the original creator. Klein deliberated as he asked, "What's the name of that religious organization? How did you end up here?" Leomester hesitated for a moment before saying, "To the far east of the Sanya Sea is where my lord sleeps. His sacred mountain is hidden somewhere there. I led a pilgrimage here in an attempt to witness his miracles to redeem myself. Perhaps it's a necessary test. We were caught by that devil and one by one we died. Later, I seized the opportunity to escape the cell and hid here, awaiting the devil's departure." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Do you know the name of that devil? What characteristics does he have?" "He?" Leomester shook his head, saying in a somewhat puzzled manner, "I do not know his exact name, but many pilgrims seem to know him. They call him the Saint of Darkness." "Saint of Darkness? A demigod? Is this Leomester's dream, or is it the demigod's dream? From the outcome of my divination, it's likely the latter. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that dangerous." Klein was about to continue asking which organization Leomester was from, and determine the beyonder powers of the Saint of Darkness, when he suddenly noticed the full-body mirror opposite the ascetic through the corner of his eye. In mysticism, mirrors were passages that connected hidden and unknown worlds. It easily brought about terrifying accidents. Therefore, Klein, who was in a dangerous dream, carefully walked over and planned on using the powers of a priest of light to destroy the item. "No, don't." Leomester seemed to sense Klein's intention as he cried out softly in horror. "Without it, I will immediately die." Klein looked at the mirror again in puzzlement. Although the environment was abnormally dark, the mirror clearly reflected 2 figures. One of them was Leomester, with his numerous wrinkles and raven-black hair. The other was the thin-faced, black-haired and brown-eyed Jayman Sparrow who wore a cap. At this moment, the Jayman Sparrow in the mirror slowly moved his head, even though Klein didn't make any movements. He revealed a deep, sinister smile towards him. The mirror's surface suddenly rippled as a hand reached out. With just the blinking of his eyes, the Jayman Sparrow, who looked identical to him, crawled out of the mirror. His face was tainted with an obvious sinisterness due to the darkness cloaking it. "How terrifying! Unfortunately, I don't look like Jayman Sparrow, therefore, you failed to scare me. If Joe Mingri came out of the mirror, I might have been woken up out of fright. Klein calmly looked at his counterpart and raised his left hand, which swirled with a layer of sunlight. The sinister Jayaman Sparrow smiled as he raised his left hand as well, making a darkness that was made up of magnificence and sinisterness surface on his glove. This corresponded to the powers of a baron of corruption. My clone, Klein thought as he raised his right hand expressionlessly. From out of nowhere, he held a short milky white scepter in his palm, and at its tip were embedded blue gems. See God Scepter. Although his actions in a dream needed to abide by logic in order to achieve the desired effects, Klein suspected that the illusory world was unable to influence the mysterious space or the gray fog. Therefore, he attempted to simplify the ritualistic process and told himself that the Sea God Scepter was stored in a similar unique zone in the spirit world. He could retrieve it whenever he wanted. The outcome from his attempt delighted Klein. Indeed, the dream world was unable to differentiate between a unique zone in the spirit world and the space above the gray fog. With the premise of the Sea God Scepter belonging to him, this sealed artifact at the demigod level was retrieved. It really works, otherwise I'd have to engage in an intense battle. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He similarly believed that the mirror was unable to replicate matters related to the gray fog. The sinister Jayaman Sparrow looked opposite him in a dazed state. He instinctively raised his hand, but his right palm was empty. Then he saw countless bolts of silver lightning shoot out, enveloping him inside, causing him to expend one paper figurine substitute after another without being able to escape from the area. With a sizzling sound, a huge ball of lightning illuminated the cramped room, which provided no room for dodging. Following that, the Jayaman Sparrow from the mirror vanished. For some reason, Klein felt himself immediately turn serene, as though he had become a sage. He turned his head and looked at Leomester again. What's the name of the religious organization you joined? Leomester trembled as he answered, Aurora Order, Aurora Order. Klein was stunned as he couldn't help but prick up his brows. At this moment, there was a loud clanking outside. The locked gates that opened outwards had seemed to have been kicked open. Thump, thump, thump. The heavy footsteps that sounded like drumming walked towards the corner, seemingly discovering where Klein and Leomester were hiding. Klein suspected that the lightning storm from before had been sensed by the Saint of Darkness. There's no way of hiding. Klein held the Sea God Scepter and kicked the black wooden door of the storage room open towards the Saint of Darkness. As the door tumbled, he clearly saw his target's appearance. The knight, who was wearing black full-body armor, had already raised up his visor at some point in time, revealing his deep wrinkled face and some of his bright raven-black hair, as well as the old scar on his cheek. He looked identical to Leomester. Even the minute features were identical. The only difference was the deep redness that emitted from his eyes. Klein was alarmed. He instinctively turned his body to the side without exposing his back to Leomester, who was trembling in horror in the storage room. He couldn't be certain that the prisoner wearing a short linen robe wasn't problematic. At this moment, the deep redness in the black-armored knight, who had the same face as Leomester, brightened drastically. He raised up the gloomy broadsword in his hand. Bam! With a step forward, he cleaved forward at a speed that Klein couldn't capture with his naked eyes. At the same time, Klein, who was standing to the side of him, subconsciously raised the Sea God Scepter and made the blue gems at its tip light up simultaneously. Whoosh! A corporeal hurricane appeared out of thin air as it swirled around Klein, protecting him within the eye of the hurricane. Whoosh! The black streams of light carved its way over as layer after layer of the strong winds dissipated, scattering in every direction, causing the entire hall to tremble. Boom! Under the black broadsword, the hurricane produced an explosive boom and was reduced to a surging wave that flooded the entire region. It lifted up all the junk into the air. The intense collision clearly shook the dream as Klein felt his mind go adrift. He couldn't help but roll twice. Plop! He fell from his bed to the floor, the fall causing him to open his eyes. That Saint of Darkness is really powerful, or should I say that I've never used the Sea God Scepter in the real world, so I'm unable to replicate its full might in the dream. Wait. It's still night. Klein suddenly noticed a problem. At that moment, the midday sunlight wasn't beaming in from the windows. His awakening was due to the intense struggle in the dream, not due to a natural occurrence. That also meant that he needed to sleep immediately, otherwise, he might very well disappear in the dark night, never to be found again. With that thought flashing in his mind, Klein pushed his right hand to the ground, flipping his body up as he flew towards his bed and laid himself down. Then he imagined the stacked spherical lights and quickly entered his dream. During this process, Klein swept his gaze to the window and vaguely saw the dark night outside. It was quiet and serene, without any sense of sinisterness. Meanwhile, he vaguely felt that there was a fog encompassing the surface of the sea relatively far away. Amidst the fog, there was a cathedral composed of rather ancient architecture. It was completely black in color. There wasn't a bell tower, and at the top of it were pitch-black ravens spiraling around it as though they were consecrating or lamenting over something. This cathedral has many buildings around. There are ordinary two-story residences and simple wooden huts. There are bread shops with hanging signboards and grayish-white mills using water wheels for power. Pedestrians pass through the main streets and alleys with their figures flitting about, impossible to know of their actual situation. A mirage, the source of the danger at night. All the people who disappeared had lost their minds and went somewhere. Klein woke up from his dreams because he subconsciously considered the questions that he had accumulated. Following that, he forcefully made himself concentrate. He retrieved the sea god scepter from the spirit world's unique zone. He remembered that he was in an intense battle with the Saint of Darkness just before he left the dream. The slightly dim golden light shone into Klein's eyes as everything immediately turned bright. What he could see was no longer the tall knight dressed in black full-bodied armor, nor was it Leomester, who was dressed in a short linen robe. Instead, he was facing a floor-to-ceiling window that faced the setting sun. The window was very clean and revealed an indescribable sense of purity under the sun's illumination. By the side of the window were tables with their original wooden colors and black high-backed chairs. Further away were rows of bookshelves with all kinds of books placed on them. A library. A book repository. Every time I enter this dream world, PLL be placed randomly in a certain area. Klein carefully observed his surroundings and confirmed that it was temporarily safe without the so-called Saint of Darkness or strange evil creature. He held the sea god scepter and first came to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the environment outside. The first thing that he saw was the opulent buildings that covered the opposite mountain peak. Huge palaces, magnificent steeples, and the towering city walls that all appeared frozen in the sunset. It was a visual spectacle. Even though it wasn't his first time seeing it, Klein still held his breath, quietly admiring this miraculous scenery for a few seconds. He then moved his gaze away towards the cliff. He saw the high walls of the black cloister and the withered trees beside the boulder. But as they were blocked, it was impossible to confirm whether Catalia remained in her original spot. Indeed, within a certain radius, it's not possible to leave this region. I'm deep inside the black cloister. Klein retracted his gaze in thought as he walked to the bookshelf. He temporarily didn't have the time to consider what happened between the Saint of Darkness and Leomester in his previous dream. This was because he needed to determine his current situation. When he arrived by the bookshelves, Klein discovered that the books placed on them had their own name. They weren't blurry and indistinct like ordinary dreams. The Spirituality of Life, Book of Charms, The Flower Within the Heart, The True Cosmos and Inner Universe. These are all books on mysticism. Klein carefully reached out and took out the Book of Charms. He quickly flipped through it and realized that he knew most of the content, but there was a small portion which he had never come into contact with. It can be confirmed that this isn't from my dream, ma'am hermits. The knowledge that pursues her and is injected into her has been conjured in this black cloister. Klein had no desire to explore beyond where he was. He held the Book of Charms and returned to the side of the floor-to-ceiling window. He found a spot to sit down and began reading in a serious manner with the sunset's glow. You can still study even in dream. As he lampooned, he took out a pen and paper as he wrote and drew. While he was engrossed in this, the light suddenly bloomed as blinding whiteness blanketed his vision. Klein naturally opened his eyes and felt warmth from the sunlight that shone inward. I just read a few pages and planned to speed read it before using dream divination to recall them. Klein sat up, frustrated. He felt like he had lost a good opportunity to study. This was because he couldn't determine if he would be randomly placed in the Black Cloister's library again. He straightened his hair, wore his cap, and went to the deck. As he observed his surroundings, he recalled the dream. That prison is likely inside the Black Cloister as well. Yes, it might be underground. In other words, the Saint of Darkness and Leomester are in a ruin nearby. It's no wonder that Will Ossipton told me not to attempt exploring the dream. These places are really filled with danger. Why would the Saint of Darkness and Leomester look identical? That dream was a little strange. Also, that full-body mirror was very magical and sinister. It actually managed to clone a Jayaman sparrow. Upon recalling this, Klein began to find examples from his past experiences to confirm his thought processes by comparison. This was called relying on experience. Soon he thought of something. He had once borrowed the mental terror candle in Backland and helped Father Otravsky eliminate the past him, a character that was dissociated from his original self. Could it be that Leomester is the Saint of Darkness from the Aurora Order? Due to certain reasons, he had split his personality, separating his good and evil side. That sealed and dark prison is the reflection of his inner dream. Yes, that full-bodied mirror. Leomester had said that if it were destroyed, he would vanish as well. When I looked into the mirror, the Jayaman sparrow inside it did form a corporeal body. It was evil. It's no wonder I felt like a sage after I eliminated the Jayaman sparrow in the mirror. It's because I got rid of my evil and sinister thoughts in my mind. Yes, that full-body mirror must be in the form of a mirror in the real world. These waters clearly have the Bayunder remains of a visionary. It conjures many unreal and real monsters that can kill, and this belongs to the spectator pathway. Therefore, being able to split good from evil and causing dissociated personalities does make logical sense. Heh heh. Saint of Darkness Leomester is a high-ranking member of the Aurora Order. He must originally be very evil, but that ruin or item stirred up his inverse side, which is the good hidden deep in his heart. It caused a split personality, hence, he is trapped somewhere nearby. Klein felt that he had roughly understood the truth to the matter, and felt a little regret. Unfortunately, I'm unable to enter the same spot a second time. Otherwise, with the Sea God Scepter and Leomester's good side, there's a high chance of defeating his evil side, the Saint of Darkness. And the damage dealt in the dream world would continue on in the real world. In that case, a good saint who understands the Aurora Order would be born. It will make it easier to strike down on this cultist organization. Klein silently sighed and turned halfway around and watched Anderson Hood walk out of the cabin. Where did you go in the dream? I didn't actually find you, the strongest hunter asked as though they were best buds. Klein secretly frowned as he asked, why should I be seen by you? Anderson was taken aback. Shouldn't you return to the spot where you left the dream upon returning there again? There are other elements involved in my random appearance in other spots within a particular radius. Something to do with my uniqueness. Klein realized that the problem was more complex than he had imagined. He said with some deliberation, I went elsewhere after entering the dream. Strange. Anderson frowned as though he was very puzzled. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he thought before speaking again, there's another strange incident. What? Klein asked cooperatively. Anderson surveyed his surroundings. Back when I was pretending to make a canoe in the hall last time, I heard the sounds of a door opening and of footsteps that came out from deep inside. But when I looked up, I found nothing. T originally thought that it was someone from the ship, but later it didn't seem like the case. Someone opened a door deep in the Hall of Murals and came out. A rampager or Bayunder creature who was nearby. Furthermore, it possesses the ability to act in dreams. After hearing Anderson Hood's description, Klein began making logical speculation. As his thoughts whirled, he suddenly had a new idea. Could it be the owner of the mysterious eyes that observed me and the deck? It's possible. If that mysterious person has been lurking on the ship the entire time and followed us into these waters, then he'd have to sleep when night falls, so he will appear in the dream world. Ma'am Hermit is completely unaware of his existence, or has she tacitly agreed to his action? Or he's the trump card that she wields, which is why she isn't afraid of the dangers in these waters when taking on my mission. No, that cannot be determined. At the very least, I can't determine that the person who opened the door deep inside the Hall of Murals is the mysterious person on the ship. Klein looked at Anderson with a deep, gloomy look before asking, why does it seem unlikely? Back when Anderson Hood mentioned it, he originally suspected that the person who opened the door was a member of the future, but he later felt that it was unlikely. Anderson chuckled. I visited every person on the ship in the dream, and I discovered that no one possesses the ability to act freely in that world except you. Unfortunately, I was pushing open a door outside back then, Klein said calmly. Anderson shrugged and said, I know, that's why I'm not suspecting you. These waters have dangers lurking everywhere. All sorts of unimaginable monsters are active here. Perhaps the person opening the door from before was the stone giant from earlier, or a rotting dragon who dreamed of countless treasures. Upon saying this, he leaned against the side of the ship and looked at the sea, which was bathing in golden sunlight, as he smiled wistfully. He discovered that ever since I escaped the ship-sinking crisis brought about by the storm, my bad luck has been decreasing bit by bit. Haha, it's obvious that it's not fixed and wouldn't last forever. Look, I successfully swam onto the island, and although I kept meeting with all kinds of bad luck, I managed to last until you arrived. Yes, I do attract monsters and did make that stone giant appear, but didn't we easily resolve it? Also, nothing happened despite me being on board for several hours. Doesn't that explain? Before Anderson could finish his statement, Klein coldly cut him off. Shut up. Doesn't this guy know to keep his words to a minimum when faced with a livid expression? I really want to beat him up. If it wasn't for the divination above the gray fog that said that you haven't mutated or have a big shot possessing you, then I would have already sunk you to the bottom of the sea. Yes, sequence 8 of the Hunter pathway is provoking. He must have easily digested the potion back then. From the bottom of his heart, Klein felt that the level of Anderson's provocation was far higher than Dannett's. Without feeling frustrated, Anderson raised his arms and said with a rueful smile, Fine, fine. I'll shut up. Seeing how he wasn't providing him with any more clues about the individual who opened the door in the dream world, Klein remained silent for a few seconds, suddenly turned around and walked into the cabin. He had discovered a huge oversight on something. Since Anderson, who's plagued with bad luck, was on the ship, that meant that the chances of them experiencing an incident would only increase exponentially. Therefore, he needed to make some preparation. After returning to his room, Klein walked to the bathroom as he picked up Azek's copper whistle and Will Ossipton's paper crane. After setting up the ritual to summon himself, he brought Tinder, the sun brooch, and the nightmare Bayonder characteristic from above the gray fog into the real world. He didn't immediately switch out his equipped inventory, but he did place them inside his suitcase and beside the biological poison bottle. This way, even if danger suddenly struck, he would have a chance to adjust his inventory, and then he could make a selection based on the danger he faced. After doing all of this, Klein felt significantly relaxed. He put away the other items and left the room for the deck, afraid that he would miss any signs of mermaids. Just as he walked out of the cabin, he saw Frank Lee crouched in a corner, looking shocked and dazed. What happened? Klein felt his heart skip a beat. He was afraid that something had gone wrong with the crazy crossbreeders' experiments, causing everyone on the future to be embroiled in a terrifying biological disaster. Frank shook his head in a daze. Didn't I mention about those little things before? They actually need to sleep for some time before they can grow and reproduce. In the end, what happened in the end? Klein's expression turned solemn. This made the strongest hunter Anderson, who was bragging about how many pirates he had hunted to the audience around him without realizing the change in their eyes, sensed something as he curiously stopped his description and came over. The crouching Frank looked up and said, They just finished a large-scale reproduction stage and have even mutated. This is a miracle. And where have they gone? Are they still in your laboratory? Klein instinctively felt that this wasn't something good. Frank used 2 seconds to digest the problem as he rolled up his sleeves to show his hairy arm. He pounded the deck in front of him and revealed a smile. They have drilled inside and have seemingly reconstructed the future. Amidst the dull pounding, something that seemed like milk spewed out like a fountain from the deck, spraying Frank Lee in the face. He licked the liquid by his lips and said in pleasant surprise, the future has produced milk. At the same time, the pirates by the side of the ship pointed down at the cannons in horror. The cannons are spewing milk. This isn't scientific. Klein nearly couldn't control the twitching of his facial muscle. Ever since he boarded the future, and ever since the ship came to the ravine and began the descent, he felt that many of the things that had happened were extremely unscientific. It even exceeded the confines of his mysticism knowledge. Anderson watched agape, nearly forgetting to inquire. He stomped his feet habitually, and successfully saw another milk fountain spew out. One thought after another flashed past Klein's mind as he acutely figured out a problem. He immediately looked at Frank Lee and asked in a deep voice, After your little things have infected the future, will it continue infecting people? While asking, Klein's right palm reached into his pocket. According to the situation, he selected the floating charm and prepared to fly into the air in order to escape the infection. Frank Lee thought seriously for a moment. In theory, yes. Before he finished his sentence, a figure appeared and kicked him in the ass, sending him tumbling a few times, slamming into pools of milk. That person was none other than linen-shirted Nina, who was draped in a blue jacket. She glared angrily at Frank Lee on the deck as she cursed while hyperventilating. "Aren't you going to finish off those darn little things of yours? Did you do this while thinking that my breasts aren't big enough?" All right," Frank Lee patted his ass and said unwillingly. At this moment, Klein had already taken out his charm and softly chanted, "Storm." He believed that he had underestimated Frank Lee's ability to cause trouble, and suspected that the disaster brought about by him would only worsen. Therefore, he decided to first fly into the air. Blue flames enveloped the charm made of tin, as squalls immediately stirred. They swirled around Klein's feet and body, lifting him off the deck and to a height of 4 to 5 meters. Anderson was first taken aback before he reached out his palm in an attempt to grab Klein, but he was a moment too late. All he could do was watch J.M. Sparrow rise up as he remained standing on the spot. This ordinarily handsome hunter shook his head with a warped expression, somewhat amused while also wanting to dismember the first mate of the future. At this moment, Frank had already taken a bottle of dark green powder. He grabbed a handful of it, and as he chanted in Jotun, he scattered it around his surroundings. The moment the powder made contact with the deck, it immediately produced green vines that grew wildly. Soon it drew out the milk and the little things, entangling the entire deck and cabin within. In just about 10 seconds, the future had been reduced into a forest of vines. "Phew, it's over." Frank smiled at Nina before his expression changed again. "They've mutated." At this moment a pirate walked over in a stagger, shouting with a tinge of horror, A watermelon is growing from my head." Klein looked towards the voice and saw a green vine drilling out of the pirate's head. One of them seemed to produce a soon-to-ripen watermelon. "This is the so-called mutation. This is way too crazy, goddamn madness." Anderson blurted out a sigh. His eyes then darted around as he said in a deep voice, "There's something wrong with the surrounding water." In midair, Klein had also determined the same thing. If there wasn't any external disruptions, then Frank Lee's experimental products and Beyonder powers wouldn't have caused a simultaneous mutation. Rip! One vine after another tore apart as the window to the captain's cabin opened. Catlia appeared there and shouted in an amplified voice with witchcraft, "Frank, stop all experiments. There are remnant ores of Mother Earth here." Mother Earth. Klein looked in surprise at Ma'am Hermit, and he felt that his theories about these waters being the battlefield of the gods had been completely overturned. "Oh my merciful mother." Frank crossed his arms and made a pose like he was hugging a baby. Following that, he sprawled on the floor as he devoutly kissed the vine. Catlia silently watched this scene as resplendent stars instantly swirled around her. Following that, she made the entire future light up. With a flick of her finger, she made a colorless flame land on the vine outside the window of the captain's cabin. The vines were immediately ignited as they silently turned to ashes. The colorless flames silently spread and wreaked havoc without harming a single sailor. As for the future, the light it produced helped it withstand the fire. Before long, the forest of vines vanished completely, leaving behind the pirate who had a watermelon growing on his head. Of course, the vine that was connected to it had been burned to nothingness. Phew, this is no different from a devil's descent. The pirate took 2 steps forward and carried the watermelon which had grown out from his head. "Don't open it." Just as Catlia's warning reverberated, the pirate had opened the watermelon with brute force, partially to vent his anger and partially to satisfy his curiosity. The watermelon split into 2, and inside it was a milky white brain filled with gullies. Flowing around it was a blood-like liquid. With a thud, the pirate died immediately, without any chance of saving him. The Beyonder characteristics on him rapidly condensed at an extraordinary speed. How sinister and crazy! Klein sighed silently and prepared to land back onto the deck. At that moment, he saw a gigantic palm suddenly reach out from the surface of the sea, smacking the side of the future. The 5 fingers of the palm were long, each almost half a meter long. The entire thing was a grayish-black color like an arid desert. Klein silently drew out a gasp as he couldn't help but look at Anderson Hood. This fellow had just mentioned that nothing had happened since he came on board. The grayish-black hand grabbed the side of the ship and quickly hoisted it up, revealing the submerged parts, inch by inch. Through the blue water waves, Klein saw a huge grayish-black shadow. Following that, squirming flesh occupied his entire vision. The monster seemed to be an amalgamation of countless blackening or graying corpses. Attached to the two gigantic palms were withered-looking arms that resembled dry timber. The arms stemmed from a corpse that was suspected to be from a giant. This giant's single eye was shut tightly, as a few heads were stuck to its neck. And further down these heads were incomplete scaly fish, lizard bodies, or warped human corpses. Layer after layer, they formed flesh that appeared like a floating island. From the different corpses and the connections of the crevices, a yellowish-green gas was emanated and spread to its surroundings, as though it was enveloping the entire area. Cough, 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 cough. Just the smell of it had made many sailors on deck cough violently. It was so bad that they couldn't even straighten their back. Upon seeing this scene, Frank Lee didn't hesitate to take out the materials inside a hidden pouch on his belt. He showcased his corresponding Beyonder powers, but to his surprise, Catlia's voice rang in his ear. "Frank, stop. Help Nina command the sailors to get them to adjust the sail." "Why?" Frank Lee subconsciously asked in return. "In this area, the supernatural matters within the authority of Mother Earth will mutate, including your powers." As Catlia spoke, she extended both her palms forward and pressed down on a particular spot on her desk. The symbols and the magical labels on the future immediately became more pronounced as they lit up one after another, converting the entire ship into a resplendent sea of stars. They seemed to correspond to each and every point of starlight that swirled around Catalia's body. The spreading yellowish-green gas was kept out as Klein began floating towards the window of his room from the closest wall. The coughing pirates felt alleviated, and under the lead of Bosun Nina and first mate Frank, as well as the instructions of Ottolov, they quickly adjusted the sails and attempted to make the future escape from the nearby waters in order to escape the influence of the mutation effects. However, the grayish-black colossal monster had held back the front of the ship, and the body beneath the water had connected to unknown parts of the ship in order to hold the future, preventing it from advancing forward. At the same time, formless tall mountains seemed to appear around them, blocking out the sea winds that blew from afar, preventing the future from using its strength no matter how it adjusted its sail. Faced with such a situation, there's a need to use a backup steam engine system. Unfortunately, the future lacks it. Yes, it can still fly with the help of the starlight, but that seems to be extremely draining on Ma'am Hermit. Besides, it will be difficult to grasp the direction and distance it will bring us. To make such a flight in such waters, there's a high chance of entering a more dangerous zone without being blessed with good luck. There's still the extremely unlucky Anderson on board. Klein floated by the window in his room as he took in the situation. He wasn't nervous, as neither Admiral of Stars Catlia nor the strongest hunter Anderson had showcased their true strength. "Of course that includes me as well," Klein added inwardly. He planned on first returning to his room and wearing tinder. Without any food around, using such a mystical item was more suitable than creeping hunger. The latter was to be reserved for him when facing more dangerous and complicated situations, before throwing it above the gray fog for it to cool down. As for the negative effect of losing items on him, Klein already had a plan. He decided to put in his wallet Azek's copper whistle, the adventurer's harmonica, and other items into his suitcase when changing his inventory, leaving creeping hunger, Murloc cufflink, and the charms from the sea god domain. He would keep a close watch on the latter too to prevent them from being lost. And from a probability standpoint, the most likely item to be lost by tinder would be the charms since they were the greatest in number. Klein wasn't worried about this. He had created charms with different effects. They were highly disposable. Besides, the corresponding metal in the storm domain is tin. It's very cheap and worth nothing. The Beyonder effects are bestowed by the Sea God Scepter, so I don't have to spend any additional money. As Klein mumbled, he reached out to push open the window to his room. At this moment, the colossal grayish-black monster, which was a combination of flesh, climbed higher again. With its approach, the busy sailors had their hair grow wildly, to the point of exceeding their waists. This wasn't the most terrifying outcome. It was more harrowing that the blob of flaxen-colored hair seemed to have a life of its own. They would interweave and bind themselves to their owners. As the hair began to produce similar changes, the lustrous sea of stars on the surface of the future could no longer hold back this influence. A number of pirates who had shaved themselves bald. Their uniqueness didn't bring them luck either. Their nose hair would rapidly grow at a discernible pace, blocking their nasal passageway. By the window of the captain's cabin, Catlia had raised her arms at some point in time. In her hand was a scroll made of smooth fish skin. Numbed, as the incantation in ancient Hermes resounded while the scroll burned in silence, a light green luster shot out from within, striking the monster's gigantic palm that appeared by the side of the ship. The squirming flesh formed from countless corpses didn't pause at all. It slammed down on the lustrous sea of stars, sending sparks flying while the ship trembled. The dark purple color in the depths of Catlia's eyes deepened. She didn't take out a new scroll, and she instead directly pushed her right palm forward. Imprison. When the mysterious incantation came out of the pirate admiral's mouth, the resplendent starlight that swirled around her flew out, descending upon the terrifying monster. The starlight instantly converged, creating a gigantic transparent amber. It enclosed all of the squirming flesh and bound it to where it was. At this moment, a pitch-black and lusterless short sword appeared in the strongest Hunter Anderson's right hand. On the surface of it was layers of diabolical patterns, but they were only an illusion. Seizing the opportunity of having the terrifying monster trapped in the starlight cage, Anderson's body produced a layer of blinding white flame. The flames flew forward, leaped out of the ship, and landed on the grayish-black flesh which was formed from countless corpses. Following that, the blinding white light rapidly flowed across the monster's surface, as if it was engaged in painting an extreme piece of artwork. With a boom, the flames surged into the sky as Anderson jumped back onto the deck with his pitch-black sword. The colossal monster remained frozen in place, as though it had lost all its vitality. Crack, crack, crack. Deep wounds appeared on its surface, shattering into countless pieces of flesh in just a second. A Reaper's offensive strength is truly exaggerated. Klein, who had redone his inventory, returned to the side of the window to see this scene. Suddenly, he frowned indiscernibly. At this moment, something unexpected happened. The fractured pieces of flesh spread out their limbs, shooting towards the deck in a barrage of attack. This colossal attacher seemed impossible to kill no matter how many pieces it was divided into. The number of pieces determined the number of monsters. Silently, a piece of grayish-black flesh facing the captain's cabin jumped up from the deck, heading straight for Admiral of Stars in a bid to wrap around her head. A figure surfaced from the darkness and shielded Catlia. It was none other than bloodless Heath Doyle. He opened his mouth as they cracked open, all the way from his nose to his chest. Soon he formed a squirming vortex of flesh and blood. The vortex sucked at the grayish-black flesh and rapidly swirled inwardly, pulling it inside. Heath Doyle landed on the deck like a shadow. After wavering a little, he finally recovered. As for the grayish-black flesh that had splintered off from the monster, it had completely disappeared. The most terrifying part of the monster is its ridiculous vitality. If only this trait can be stolen, having used another floating charm, Klein floated out the window. He reached out his black-gloved right hand and spread his fingers. The scene before him changed as a result. Blobs of different, gorgeous colors replaced the corresponding people and item. These colors kept changing as they rapidly twinkled, making it difficult for anyone to grasp the rules it followed. With the help of this vision, Klein discovered that the grayish-black flesh shared some of this luster. Although it was splintered, it was actually one. Calmly, he clenched his right fist, grabbed a blob of the light, and turned his wrist to the right. Suddenly, Klein saw the yellowish-green luster being drawn away, fusing into his right palm. This was the corresponding trait of the fog of poison. He had stolen the grayish-black monster's fog of poison. This was Tinder's effect. At the same time, Klein discovered that his damage transfer bay under power was lost. He no longer had it. I can only steal from the same target once every 12 hours. With some level of realization, Klein looked at the surrounded future. The yellowish-green fog, which was corroding the resplendent sea of stars, rapidly thinned and no longer looked obvious. The grayish-black flesh that scattered everywhere also showed signs of desiccating and darkening. With that, the pirates found a chance to catch their breath. As for Catalia, she wore a golden brooch on the front of her classic robe. The brooch seemed to be made of gold, and it was shaped like a bird with a long feather tail. The surrounding atmosphere suddenly turned staid and serene. All the chaos and anxiety vanished in a baffling manner. Even Klein sensed the indescribable influence and felt like he had become an emotionless zombie. Seeing how the critical moment was at hand, a ship came cruising over. It was also a sailboat and was equally large. Its color was mainly dark with a ghostly green to it. Its ghastly pale mainsail drew a blooming pitch-black tulip. It was the flagship of Admiral Hell Ludwell, the Black Tulip. It was a ship that frequently plied these waters,